Well, hello all, and welcome to this joint Harpers New Zealand Wine Growers webinar, which forms part of the excellent week-long programme for New Zealand Wine Week. You can find more details about the events running throughout at nzwine.com. Right, I'm Andrew Catchpole, editor of Harpers Wine and Spirit, and I'll be hosting today's session titled New Zealand Sustainability, Challenging the Myths Around Food Miles, or perhaps more accurately for the sake of our discussion today, wine miles. Joining me are Ed Massey, General Manager, Sustainability at New Zealand Wine Growers, George Soleas, President and CEO of LCBO in Canada, Troy Christensen, CEO of supplier Enotria & Co in the UK, plus Anne Jones, Category Manager, Wine, Beer and Spirits at UK premium supermarket Waitrose, and Simon Buck, co-founder of Wine Dog Imports based in the US. We'll be hearing from everyone in a little while. But as many in the audience will no doubt be aware, New Zealand's wine industry has collectively made great strides to embrace and further all aspects of sustainability, looking to be a green leader among the world's wine-producing nations. Indeed, New Zealand producers are set to achieve net zero emissions ahead of a 2050 regulatory deadline. And with climate change likely to soar back to the top of the agenda as and when the pandemic recedes, with clean and green credentials gaining ever more importance in consumer purchasing decisions, this would appear to be a path towards delivering future economic sustainability too. And so far, so good for New Zealand. Value exports recently hit a record $2 billion in 2020, and sustainability has been an increasingly important message in supporting those sales. But one fly in the otherwise environmentally sound ointment is the country's distance from its primary markets. As anyone who's staggered off a 24-hour flight from the UK knows, our Kiwi friends are a long way from almost everywhere. Which is why a key question to address today is that of food or wine miles, and how the perception of that sits with a net zero emissions goal and strong sustainability drive. So before opening up to a general panel discussion, followed by an opportunity for audience Q&A, and please do use the Q&A function if you have any questions for the panel, and we'll endeavour to answer as many as we can. We're first going to hear from Ed Massey, who's going to give some background on the importance of sustainability and the New Zealand to the New Zealand wine industry and why. So to kick off, over to you, Ed.
Thanks, Andrew. Welcome in. Now, today I just want to achieve three real key objectives. The first is to bust a few myths about wine miles and our commitment to sustainability. Highlight that wine miles are really a poor proxy, for an overall measurement of sustainability, and really highlight what the New Zealand industry is doing to combat climate change at an industry level and to promote sustainability as we move towards our 2050 goal. But first, just a little bit of context about our industry. We're a small producer on the global scale, 1% of global production, 40,000 hectares nationally, 30,000 of those in the Marlborough region. We have 700 wineries and 700 growers. And 71% of our production is Sauvignon Blanc, a key variety that is export driven. Our key markets are on the other side of the world, largely the United States, the United Kingdom, and Canada, and we have a key market as well in Australia. Sustainability has been a key part of the New Zealand industry for a long time. Our flagship program, Sustainable Wine Growing New Zealand, was launched in 1995. That program is an independently certified program which sets standards and guidance for members on their performance across 6 different focus areas of sustainability: climate change, waste, water, pest and disease, people, and soil. 96% of our vineyard area is SWIN certified, and over 90% of our wine produced is produced in a SWIN certified winery. So we have a very, very high level of participation. So I think that really highlights the commitment at an industry level we have to sustainability. I just now want to turn to some of those myths around food miles or wine miles. So at a whole of life cycle perspective, the emissions associated with transporting wine to market only makes up approximately 1/5 of the carbon emissions in total. When you think about the biggest sources of emissions in the production of a bottle of wine, it's those sources around packaging, so the glass and how it is boxed. Also, what happens in the vineyard. What are the chemicals or other inputs, and where do they come from? And then also, there's emissions associated with consumption, so going to the store to get the wine and take it home or drink it, and as well as the end of life, so the disposal, either hopefully through recycling, but also landfill. So when you think about those in total, 78% is associated with everything else apart from the shipping element. And when you think about what New Zealand is doing in the across our sustainability program, we have really good measures in place to minimise the inputs of carbon emissions across those other areas of production, as well as in the distribution space. But starting with getting wine to market, yes, it's true. We need to export for our industry to thrive. And it's really important to note that shipping, or international shipping, is a key source of getting wine to market. It's a really efficient mode of transport, much more efficient than road transport or rail transport, or God forbid, air transport, which is perhaps the least carbon friendly of all transport modes. But then when you look back down the supply chain, our SWINS program really sets key standards on how the rules and regulations around chemical application, and most importantly, when you look at New Zealand's energy grid, we are 80% or 85% now, fueled by renewable energy sources. And that's the energy that goes into, the production of wine in the winery, the production of the bottle that the wine goes into. And these are absolutely, some of the heaviest elements of carbon emissions in the life cycle analysis of, the production of a bottle of wine. Then when you think about, our fossil fuel use in the vineyard, relative to some other industries, due to the some of the rules and regulations that we set in SWINS, they're relatively low. So we're confident that when you look across the life cycle of a production of a bottle of wine, that New Zealand wine really stands as a leader in the climate change space. But we're certainly not satisfied with where we're at the moment. And as you said, we've set that 2050 goal, and we're looking to achieve more. So we've just redone our Sustainable Wine Growing New Zealand questionnaires to really get a good handle on what's going on in the vineyard and the winery in terms of the key sources of emissions. So the questionnaire is live now with members, and by July, August this year, we'll have a pretty good sense of a complete industry picture through our very high levels of participation in SWINS around those key sources of emissions across our industry. And we're really proud of that, and we're continuing to support members so that they can report information more accurately and better, as we move into the future. We've recently engaged in some research with one of New Zealand's key carbon accounting firms, Toitu and EnviroCare, to really give our members guidance on those key emissions and where to reduce them, both in the winery and in the vineyard, and also have set key goals around made members aware that climate change is really critical to have at the governance level, and that they can expect more measurement through the SWINS process in the future. So overall, we're committed to making progress in the climate space. We're committed to mitigating the impacts of climate change. It's absolutely critical for our cool climate viticulture, for the unique flavours that go into our wine. We're committed to sustainability across the board, and we want our consumers to be confident that when they reach for a bottle of New Zealand wine, there's nothing to fear in terms of the emissions related to getting that wine to market, because overall our sustainability picture, while not perfect, we're making real progress and are really committed to sustainability as a concept for our industry. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, Ed, thanks for that. And it's interesting. I mean, so what we're suggesting is that you need to look at the broader picture, the holistic picture, basically, when considering either someone down the supply chain or the final consumer, the overall picture. And this is part of, I guess, what we're discussing through today. It's I guess a good point to kick off with the first of my questions to the wider panel. It's been widely predicted when the pandemic recedes that environmental and sustainable issues will have been driven further up the agenda. What's the panel's view on that? And does sustainability play a significant or a growing role in your company's DNA? So how important is it to you as an operator? Could we perhaps begin with you, Troy?
Sure, of course. Thank you. I appreciate being here today. We distribute a number of New Zealand wines, and I do think that the country has done a very good job in communicating a very consistent message of sustainability. Interestingly, we do have, which is one of the few places to actually sell wine in a lockdown, is a digital arm. And you are seeing that the search terms for more of the wellness kinds of, so on the pesticides, the organic, has become very important. So I do think that maybe as alcohol is being poured all over everything during the pandemic, maybe sustainability, or at least, some of those things might take a bit of a back seat. But I would tell you that Google and some of the other kinds of search engines have really identified that this wellness concept, and that people are searching for wine are really interested in what they put in their body. And so I think it is extremely important. And because the consumer's asking for it, the retailers are asking for it, and our customers are asking for it. So there isn't one tender that goes by, be it in a national account or an off trade, where there isn't a core piece of a request on how sustainability can be driven through that customer to the consumer. And so I think it is extremely important for us as well. And I think there is some question on where and how is this going to be driven, but it's being driven right now by the consumer, and so our customers are demanding it. So we make it a core part of some of our portfolio selection, ensuring that in fact we have enough and a very solid story to tell and position many of our brands right behind the sustainability story.
Yeah, and George, perhaps you could pick up on that. What's LCBO as a retailer? What's the story there in Canada? Is a fairly similar situation?
Yeah, it is, and thank you for having me, Andrew. Very pleased to be here. And I'm not sure how much the people that are on attendance know about the LCBO. I'll just take a few seconds to tell you very quickly who we are. So across Canada, there are different models of how beverage alcohol is sold. It is either through provincial brand or private retailers or a mixture. And in the province of Ontario, which is one of the 10 provinces in Canada, which is also the most populated province, about 14 million people. The LCBO is a provincial government-owned corporation that operates about 670 stores across the province, and we have someone said we have a robust e-commerce platform and a wholesaling division that supports about 450 grocery stores, 400 private operated convenience stores. We supply the beer store and thousands of restaurants. So. And I always say that the world is our shopping basket. We buy from more than 80 countries, including, of course, New Zealand, that the New Zealand wines do very well in Ontario. And this is something that many others don't do, is we chemically test and taste every product that we sell through the LCBO to ensure that it is safe, that it is authentic, and we match that with the label to make sure that it is compliant, and that speaks to the authenticity of the product. And then this year we'll have about $7 billion worth of sales, and our yearly dividend is given back to the government, and they support investments in healthcare, education. So getting to your question, sustainability is a key pillar for our business and our part. And we recently launched our new social impact platform, and we called it the Spirit of Sustainability, which focuses on three main objectives: good people, good planet, and good partnerships. And we believe that these three P's will give you the fourth P, which is profit, and that comes, automatically. I'm sure over the course of the discussion today, I can go into more detail about what we have accomplished in this space. Now, you asked the question if the environmental and sustainable issues have been driven further up the agenda, and I agree with everything that my colleague said. I believe that the pandemic has not slowed corporate response to social and environmental issues. In fact, in many cases, it has accelerated, and I know that from ourselves. But I would argue that we've seen a similar response, but to a lesser extent after the financial crisis in 2008, 2009. That's what happened after the crisis. No doubt, many things will change fundamentally after this crisis. And every crisis puts a sharp focus on organizations' ability to weather the storm, and no matter how well you're prepared, this typically requires a fresh look at every foundational element of the organization. So in fact, in a recent Forbes article, a survey of about 150 executives found that almost 90% of them, they said that they understand that now, more than ever, companies must lead with purpose. And in fact, more than 70% of these people shared that in their entire careers, they had never felt more pressure to respond to social justice issues. So there is a much bigger appreciation, in my opinion, at this point, that we're all in this together and we have to work together to get out of this. And sustainability is something that I think brings.
Yeah, I think you're right, and we see momentum building, and I recognise that sometimes there's a gulf between pronouncements and the actual reality of what's taking place, and even allowing for that in the world of politics here in the UK. There's certainly a lot of discussion from and in government about building back with a greener agenda, basically as part of the economic recovery from the pandemic. So change that being a catalyst to accelerate, if you like, things that are already in place, tentatively coming along. Anne, could we pick up with you from the I guess the UK sort of consumer side of things? I mean, where does Waitrose sit? And by all means, introduce Waitrose a little for those out there who won't know you.
Thanks very much and welcome. Thanks very much for joining us, everybody. I was just thinking 2 years ago, I was sitting in New Zealand very happily in the sunshine. So not at all very focused on the idea of New Zealand at the moment, as we should be this week. But I was hugely impressed by Swins, which I think Ed has explained beautifully, actually. And as a Waitrose representative on that trip, it really reinforced for me how we can clarify and help to bring sustainability to our customers. We're a partnership model, which means we've got a statement embedded in our constitution right from the early 1900s that where we are supposed to contribute to the well-being of the communities in which we operate. We were very early on that well-being trend that George has mentioned as well. And so we're always looking at ways that we can innovate with Unpacked. But as well, it is about how we represent sustainability to our customers, and it's about doing what's right overall. And as Ed said, it's about having that educated view of the full life cycle, because whether it's organic, whether it's dietary, whether it's wine miles, whether it's carbon emissions, sustainability is such a complex concept for customers to understand that they trust us as a brand to try and distill that and for us to do the right thing. And actually, that shopping mission is still pretty speedy for most customers in wine, and most products still look relatively the same. So for them to make that differentiation needs some clarity. And I think also, as George said, we're all in this together, and it's for us as an industry to try and bring clarity for the customer to actually what's an incredibly complicated set of rule sets in lots of different areas. And for us to try and bring clarity to that would be what would, I think, actually help us all drive forward and help us make some real inroads. I mean, as part of that, as a representative of Waitrose, I'm on the work group for Wine GB and their new sustainability scheme, but also on the relatively new sustainable wine roundtable, which is I think, hoping to be a catalyst for a sort of a global consensus about sustainability. So looking at what all these brilliant areas across the world are doing, because of course what SWINS is doing is brilliant, but it works for New Zealand, and somewhere with completely different climatic or social, cultural issues may need to have a slightly different approach. So it's trying to come up with something that customers can trust, whether that be from a monopoly market or a retailer such as us. So I guess to clarify where I stand, I'm here today to represent the Waitrose customer, and also potentially to bring a slightly commercial aspect, because what we all want as an industry is to make sustainability work commercially, and to be able to persuade customers that if there is a cost, it's for good and it's for the right thing, and it's clarity. And obviously, of course, what we'd really like is for there not to be an additional cost, and for the sustainable way to be the most efficient way for people and for product and for the planet. So yeah, it's a big, complicated issue, and I'm just delighted that actually we're making such progress in having industry-wide collaborative discussions.
Excellent. And we've had a few questions come in from the audience. Hello, audience, lovely audience out there. One of them, we will look to get to you all, and I think I'll slot some of those questions in as we go along where they're most relevant. But Anne, just staying with you for a sec, Dominic Buckwell has asked, what is the latest research / thinking as to the extent to which consumer buying choices are influenced by wine being marketed as sustainable? So do you have anything on that?
We do. We have a little bit of research. It's not quite as detailed as I think, Dom, you probably like. Sorry, not that I'm insinuating anything that Dom's attitudinal bias might prefer, but we do have data. But effectively, the data is, yes, they want sustainable, but they don't know what it means. Whether that's the people will, and the thing, if you ask them about it in qualitative research, they'll come up with organic, they'll come up with vegan. If you really push somebody, they might consider carbon emissions and transport. But that's after you've sat someone in a room for half an hour and asked them questions about sustainability relating to wine, which you don't do in a normal purchasing behaviour. And I think two of the other challenges that we came up with and we concluded from our most recent research, one of them is the fact that people are buying wine in an indulgent mindset usually. So they're not necessarily thinking about being good. That's not the driver. Whereas they might be thinking that if they're buying a gluten-free grain or something. But equally, and this is a positive, I think, but we haven't had our fear moment in the lifetime of most wine consumers. So whether it be meat or chickens or people not wanting to think about animals being abused, or whether there's been a scare about a healthcare concern in a certain food area, in wine, we haven't had that. People still think of wine as wine. And so it's the only thing they really recognise is the organic. That yes, there's a little element of biodynamic in there, and possibly for some people who've got more focused consumer groups, maybe than a supermarket, then biodynamic might come out more. But it's still, they just think it's organic plus in most cases. So again, it's the communication, but it is important to customers, but they couldn't tell you what they meant. And actually it might just be that they see a label that doesn't look quite as glossy and it looks a little bit more authentic, and they think, oh, that's probably sustainable. You know, the logic and sustainability and the detail, we haven't helped make that leap that enables you to look at a product and then make a decision based on a sustainability cue.
Yeah, okay. All right, thanks, Anne. And Simon, could we ask the same question to you, sort of setting the scene as to everyone's backgrounds, the importance of sustainability, what drives those strands through your business and how that expresses itself?
Yeah, sure. So we're actually really a tale of probably two slightly different businesses. First and foremost, Wine Dogs is an importer and distributor of wines in the US. We're based in New York. But a second part of our business is that we do produce wine in New Zealand. And I think our introduction to sustainability and the sustainability learning curve probably started with that New Zealand business when we signed up as a paying member of SWINS. I think over the years, our portfolio is certainly of wines that we import from New Zealand and sort of globally has sort of changed dramatically. I think in probably back in the day, we bought in wines where we thought we had a path to market, maybe, rather than wines that we liked. And I think that's the change we've sort of had more recently. And we've had a move to largely family-owned and operated wineries, which are all very serious about sustainability and its surrounding issues. Although we're based in New York, we actually warehouse in both California and the metro New York area. So we have plenty of challenges, logistically speaking, with regards to sustainability and food miles, which I think will probably tie in quite well with today's topic.
Yeah, okay, great, thanks. So I just want to get a sense from you, the panel, is how well the wine world is doing at progressing, not just New Zealand, but the wine world generally at progressing down the sustainability path. How does it, I don't know who wants to pick.
I can jump in there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think, based on the experience we've had in the last few years, we are seeing, a real focus on sustainability as that broader concept, rather than picking off, a specific element of it. In recent years, we've had, visitors from around the world looking at the SWINS program, and in that sense, understanding that the contexts are different overseas, but imitation is a lovely form of flattery, and we've had engagement with different regions and wine nations around how can we help them to become more sustainable. So I think it's, when you're looking at the consumer, that baby boomer generation is demographically falling away a little bit, being replaced with a more conscious consumer, where sustainability really is front of mind. And I completely agree with Anne. It's about explaining the benefits of sustainability across the different areas that encompass it, simply and effectively to communicate to that audience. And I think all countries are responding to those demographic changes.
Okay, I don't know, Troy, if you want to pick up on that, yeah.
Well, I think New Zealand did a very good job of having a real sort of overarching country-based approach. And I think one of the challenges that we have in the industry, and I think Anne talked about it a little bit earlier, means a whole bunch of different things to different people. And so the consumer is getting a bit confused, and different people in different countries are sort of branding themselves on different programs that could be very relevant, maybe locally, but maybe not as much internationally, and or confusing sometimes. And again, Andrew, you and I were in California, and there was Lodi rules and there was Napa Green. Well, these are two places right next to each other that were sort of marketing themselves on what was really relevant for themselves locally, and they're doing the right things for their community. But then how does that translate over into, a UK consumer? And at the same time, after talking about the whole thing, they plunked a gigantic heavy bottle of wine with glass about as thick and a punt you couldn't believe, because that wasn't as relevant to them, but it is relevant to a consumer over here. So I think that there are a lot of people moving in a positive direction, but I really am concerned that the inconsistencies, almost the cross purpose of some of these things, someone selling themselves as so green, but yet have a really thick bottle, can be considered pretty hypocritical. So we got to be very careful that we don't actually do more damage to ourselves than good. And I think that's where the industry needs to do a little bit more of trying to create some consistency and positive messaging with each other.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's that, for me, it's that consensus piece. But equally, I would also say that I think the wine industry is in a really good place. I think wine producers in general care about their ground, and that's where it's come from. That's where it started. And we haven't had, we haven't had to start this because we are, we're not soy, we're not palm oil. We haven't got those issues, which is where a lot of sustainability has come from. Actually, is where there's been a massive issue that's created, and then those industries have had to get together and make some genuine change. But then with that comes the small small challenge of the fact that we're such a disparate industry. Whereas for soy, palm oil, forestry, there are a few big players who, once they make a change, and if they can be seen that it's a commercially viable change, they make that change and the whole industry goes with them. Whereas we don't have any producers really of that size, which is why we need to make that difficult leap to creating a consensus between producers, retailers, distributors, that whole piece of the value chain. And that is difficult, but it's brilliantly kind of heartening to see that it's starting and we're all having these discussions and there's definitely progress being made.
Yeah,
I agree.
It's George. Andrew?
George, yes.
Yeah. So I agree with everything that's been said, Troy, and there is a confusion in terms of what is sustainability by the customer. There isn't a unified definition of what is sustainability, and sustainability is very different in every. So I think that's what adds to the complexity here. But there are sustainability leaders in the wine world for sure, and New Zealand is certainly a home to many of them. At the LCBO, as one of the largest retailers of beverage alcohol, I believe that we're uniquely positioned to significantly influence consumers and to encourage a culture of sustainability. But we have to do it right. We have to make sure that people understand what it is. Everybody right now thinks that a sustainable product is an organic product or a biodynamic product. And of course, we know that's not the case. But not only at the LCBO, not only are we working to improve our processes to identify sustainable products, but we are committed to recognizing our good partners in the industry and to collaborate with them and to sort of share and learn from them and understand what needs to be done, especially those that are making strides in sustainability, like, for example, and we do that in a number of different areas. I mean, we look at their diversity and inclusion, for example, or we look at their community investment, or we look at their environmental practices. We have a code of conduct that we ask our suppliers and our partners to agree to, so that when we purchase from these people, we know that they also believe in what we believe. So I think that as a large retailer, we can influence, but we have to do it the right way. We can't just allow everybody to have that sustainability logo on their product and introduce what I call the greenwash. And we have to be careful as to how we do this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just to bring in a couple of comments and questions from the audience, and I think this might have already half been answered from William Haddleton, who was asking about, from a sustainability standpoint, why not look to a standard like that provided by becoming a certified B corporation rather than each country having its own standards. But I think, Troy, you and others have made the point that, Ed, as you were saying, that you've got a very unified approach over a whole country. And it's part of the confusion of consumers that there are these differing and disparate programs, all of which are doing good and moving people down a path or various paths at differing speeds towards goals. But that is a challenge. The other point, and I think we will move on to this issue of food miles or wine miles now. And I think just to begin that, we've had a couple of questions about glass, the sustainability of glass and moving glass long distances. So we'll certainly, for several of you who've asked questions relating to that, touch on that as we move forward. There's also an interesting piece, dare I say it, a little plug, on Harper's website today. NSERC has come up with or launched a highly sustainable glass bottle produced using it's very low or close to zero energy used in its production, and once that's fully recycled, they're obviously hoping it could be a bit of a game changer in terms of glass, vis-a-vis its weight, the immense amount of energy that goes into producing it, and then of course what we're just about to talk about, the additional weight in terms of transportation stuff with glass as a heavier packaging. So let's move on to this sort of food miles issue, which New Zealand's obviously identified as the sort of chink in its armour. So we're talking about a fifth of the transportation being a fifth of carbon emissions in total when you're moving your average, I presume, bottle of wine from New Zealand to, and let's face it, anywhere as far overseas. It's a 2.5 hour flight to the closest coast of Australia, I seem to remember. So what are, and again, Ed, maybe you could kick off, but what are the common misperceptions surrounding food miles? And then perhaps other panelists could come in and sort of pick up on the points raised.
I think there's two key, I guess, misconceptions. One, that that wine miles or food miles is a proxy for sustainability, and we've talked about that. That it's a key element, but it's not the whole picture. And I think that's a really important one. The second one is that you talked about that the actual distribution being a fifth of the overall life cycle analysis of carbon emissions how a bottle of wine is produced. What that says to me is it's the 80-20 rule. You can if you focus on the 80, you're going to make big changes. The 20% is still really important. And so when you're from a New Zealand perspective, we know that the Visi plant in Auckland, which produces a lot of the New Zealand made glass, has one of the highest recycling rates of cullet in the world. And so glass as a container has that potential to have that circular life through an efficient recycling program. And I think that is one of the things that you need to consider when considering when thinking about the carbon emissions associated with wine. Second of all, I think we need to look at the efficiency of sea freight. You can get a lot of bottles of wine on a large freighter. And when you look at your distribution channels, sea is by far the most efficient. 5 times more efficient than road. Around 40% more efficient than rail, and I think 50% more efficient than than air transport. So I think when you're looking at the very narrowly, there are the wine miles concept. I think you really got to focus on how that food or that wine is moved, because sea freight is by far the most efficient from a carbon emissions perspective.
Does anyone else want to pick up on this? I mean,
Andrew.
Yeah,
George. Andrew, it's George. I think emissions associated with the transport of goods, it's just one factor in the product's life cycle. I think it's important to consider the entire journey. In the case of wine, for example, is how the grapes are grown, as a manufacturing process, is the packaging and distribution choices, and it's the reuse or the recycling opportunities of the end of life. That's another reason why at the LCBO several years ago, we introduced a lightweight glass bottle, and we put guidelines in place, and we did it in a gradual way. We started with a 420 gram bottle maximum for any wine that we sell that is less than $15.95, and then gradually increased to $17.95. And we were able to convert every one of our suppliers to the lightweight glass. So we, over the years, we've seen a significant reduction in the products a significant increase of products that we sell that are in lightweight glass. And since the program launched almost a decade ago, the LCBO has reduced annual waste by more than 6 million kilograms. And the other thing that we're very proud of and we were able to do is to actually introduce what we call the Waste Diversion Ontario in 2002, which is called the Blue Box. And we are now able to recycle more than 93% of the products that we sell, which is cans as well as bottles. I think all of that adds to the reduction of the emissions. I agree that transportation is 20%, it's a significant percentage, but there's another 80% that we should
Okay, and this opens up a really interesting vein, and we've had several questions coming in about this, and this is relating to transportation and the actual packaging that wine's in. So, Ed, just really quickly, because I want to throw this over to others in the panel, what percentage? I should have the figure. I've got a sense that it's somewhere up in the upper 40%. But what percentage of New Zealand exports, shipments, leave in bulk versus packaged?
Yeah, you're spot on there, Andrew. You know, it's increased over the last decade to over 40%, and is trending up each year.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so just and again, quite quickly, what's the New Zealand wine growers / general industry thinking about sending bulk consignments overseas as opposed to retaining what is often seen as that quality control and, you know, sort of greater provenance and authenticity of being bottled at source? Is that a continued issue and something that perception drags on in terms of allowing you to perhaps send more by bulk?
Yeah, look, it's a debate that we have all the time, you know, within the New Zealand industry, and I think it's important that, you know, within the sustainability parameters, it's really important to enable, you know, a broad diversity of business model that our members can partake in, and, you know, I think it's a balance, and, you know, from a carbon perspective, you know, that the idea of sending wine offshore in bulk has the potential to, you know, reduce the total emissions if, you know, at point of bottling, you know, the bottling plant is run on an efficient, you know, source of power. And I think that's one of the key advantages that we have in New Zealand, is that for those bottled or produced and bottled here, you know, our electricity grid is, you know, 85% made from renewable sources, primarily hydro.
Yeah, there are very interesting considerations there as to, you know, that's obviously a massive consideration. I guess you could look to France and say, you know, it's got a very high percentage of nuclear power, for example.
Yeah.
In terms of environmental emissions, unless something goes wrong, it's actually very clean. So there are so many different considerations to bring into each equation. Yeah.
I think sustainability is a journey, you know, and by focusing on one element of sustainability, you might actually have, you know, negative impacts on another, you know, and it's really that balance across that broad spectrum of goals that you need to consider, and the greater good overall.
So, okay, if we just stick with the bulk and packaging side of things at the moment, and perception and ease of pushing onto customers and consumers. I mean, Troy, from your business's perspective, I mean, what are the benefits and drawbacks of bulk?
Yeah, well, so when I was here in my prior life, I invested in, as part of Constellation, the largest bottling facility and bonded warehouse, and we did bring a lot of that over, and there was a substantial amount of work on ensuring that we had minimum amounts of dissolved oxygen, and so that the taste profile would be appropriate. And I think we proved that, and at a commercial level became very successful. Because New Zealand always has a bit of that premium price point, there is a sense of nervousness, but we have done it with some own label, and we've done it with some other products. I think at a particular level, I'm not sure the consumer, it's really difficult to sort of communicate to the consumer the benefit of doing that from a sustainability standpoint, but I think it is becoming more and more accepted. And I think it does help manage, the sustainability process a little bit better. I do think the commercial piece, which is probably going to be a bit of the conversation a little bit later, I think George is doing a great stuff. Systembolaget, you know, in Sweden are doing amazing things, but as a monopoly, you know, you have the ability to control with that appropriate kind of mandate, you know, the sustainable kind of messaging and communication and the commercial proposition. Whereas Anne is probably one of the few retailers in the world that sort of makes this a core part. Maybe, you know, there's other people that are going to be doing it, but you still see that there is, within a very tough market, very fragmented, a commercial positioning that people are trying to maybe get on the back of. But at that entry level, you know, there is at least local bottling, but I don't think it has seen the kind of, activity that New Zealand has pretty consistently. So, someone bottling locally, there is a benefit to that. But if it's all done with, less than the best standards and to hit certain commercial price points, which is important from a category, that's still attracting a bunch of consumers. That's a bit of the battle that we have. And I think within the UK, where it is that, this kind of challenge and other kinds of commercial markets, New Zealand's doing it right. They have a price premium that has, I think been invested between the sustainability and the marketing of the sustainability very well. But not everybody's on board with that. I think that's the challenge we have, is to drive not just sustainability on the environment, but on the commercial proposition, which allows other people then to invest in these kinds of things like New Zealand has, so that it sort of benefits everybody up and down, and we can, as an industry, also, have some sort of financial stability.
Yeah, actually, Anne, do you want to pick up on that, and especially on the commercial side of all of this? Yeah.
Definitely. I think, Troy is absolutely right, but I think where we have to accept with such a huge packaging change is that it's going to be over generations. We've trained customers over hundreds of years to believe that a glass bottle that looks the way it does, burgundy, whatever it is, that means quality. And although there are some markets that are further ahead than others in terms of appreciating bag-in-box for its sustainability, and as Troy says, it's the monopolies have some advantages in their tender processes, or indeed as do retailers, where they have all own label, where they can specify certain things. But up until now, lots of sustainable solutions, whether it be lightweight bottles, bag-in-box, or even cans, have come in at that cheaper end of the market in order to make them competitive. And what we really need is a sustainable innovation that is premium and people are prepared to pay more for. And that's the holy grail that we haven't yet found, I don't think.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair enough. So you've on the one hand, you've got growing consumer interest in all things flagging up sustainability and all things sustainable, but you've then got this reticence on the other hand of actually buying into perhaps more sustainable formats. Yeah.
Price, taste, will I like it, variety, all that stuff as a consumer choice, unfortunately, still trumps sustainability. If it's a nice to have, and we need to make it a must have.
Yeah. But we sense that it is moving up the agenda. It might just not have actually leapfrogged some of those absolutely major,
but it's like so many other major challenges the world's got at the moment. And I think, we have to, we're at the forefront of something great here, but it's going to be a long journey, and there aren't quick fixes. This is something that we all collectively as an industry have to kind of put our shoulder against and push and try and do the best we can to move it forward as effectively as we can.
If I could interject, Andrew, I think one of the things that was interesting in fair trade, as an example, a lot of the tenders that came out were, I like fair trade from the retailers. We wanted all fair trade, but we wanted the same price as it was without fair trade. And you're like, well, that is exactly the opposite of what it means. And then you're trying to do exactly what you weren't supposed to do. So I think, to Anne's point, if we can find that sustainability that people will pay for and get the message across pretty consistently, I think that is the thing that is going to help everybody out.
Or you look at something with higher margin. So, it needs to be, it's a really premium product. And at that point, there's a little bit more flex, perhaps, for a little bit of that margin to be on, whether it's the fair trade or fair trade esque or whatever that messaging is. Trying to do it at the sort of $7.99 price point is always going to be an almost impossible challenge.
And that also leads to, so yes, consumers need to put their money or be persuaded to put their money where their mouth is. Otherwise, a lot of these things, a lot of aspects of sustainability don't necessarily work, or at least in the short to medium term, don't work. There may be greater benefits and economic benefits to producers and suppliers down the line. Simon, if we bring you in, who should be shouldering the responsibility when someone sees a bottle, a heavy bottle with a great fat, deep punt of wine or spirits, on the counter, on the shelf, on the table? Whose responsibility is that? Should it be shouldered right across from consumer through supplier to producer? Is the finger normally pointed at the producer? I
think it's that's somewhat of a tough question. I think early years with our business, as I mentioned, everything was a wee bit of a learning curve for us, and we, I think, made mistakes on the way. We bottled up a vintage of wine one year in premium Burgundy bottles, and then soon discovered we could get far less into a container than we previously could. So we made a move to lightweight Burgundy almost immediately after that, and tend to, I guess, like that format if it is bottles. But then we also do deal with some premium, top end wineries who do use perhaps some heavier glass. I think here in the US, we've got a pretty diverse market here with 50 different markets, and so what is good, I think, for a New York retailer might be very different for a New Jersey retailer or a Californian retailer. And I think there are just, I guess, different levels of sustainability that people take into their business, or in fact, if they really truly care, I think it generally comes back to maybe the bottom line as to what decisions I think they might make. I think very much the customer we have in New York in general is of perhaps a smaller. They're more focused on organics. They're more focused on sustainability. Whereas a customer perhaps in New Jersey is a much larger business, so they have, I think, very different challenges themselves. As an importer, though, our portfolio over the years has changed, I guess, a lot to sort of, and we've made a move more into that organic, biodynamic, sort of natural space. So that's, I guess, informed a lot of the choices that our buyers do make with us.
Okay, does anyone else want to pick up on that? And then I've got a question I'd like to direct to you, Ed, actually. But yeah, Ed, fire away.
I just thought, the conversation that we've had just recently and some of the questions coming in really sort of getting to the core of why we do sustainability. And I think it's a really important question. And for us, sort of it comes down to 4 key points. And firstly, there's a market expectation that as an industry, that we are, behaving in a sustainable way, and that sustainability is what they want. Secondly, there's a social license to operate question here. The wine industry, as Anne said, has enjoyed benefits over the years of not being associated with things like palm oil or other key primary production challenges from around the world. Our commitment to sustainability is really important to continue that to reduce cost of production. Thirdly, that it highlights for me sustainable business decisions can really positively impact the bottom line, as Simon's point around getting those fewer big bottles into a container. Using the lightweight bottles, you can get more. And I think in summary, it's sustainability overall is the right thing to do for our industry, for people, for planet, and for profit. And I think when you look at those 3 things, that's the answers the why question. And I think we've been sort of grappling now with the how.
Yeah, no, that's
Andrew, can I add to that?
Please, yeah.
And so one of the reasons why we made the decision to ask our suppliers to reduce the glass weight was because we looked at a number of different factors, including the fact that almost 80% of the wines that we sell in our market, they're less than $15.95. So if you were to ask these suppliers to put their liquid in bottles that are less than 420 grams, and in fact, some of these bottles are actually 280 grams. And by the way, the breakage rate in the warehouse is lower for the lighter weight glass than the heavier weight glass. Then the return on your investment is tremendous. And we were able to achieve that and then gradually raise the price to $16.95 and $17.95. And now we're almost in the 85% of the products that we sell in our market. And we see huge benefits there. We're not going to focus on the high-end rare products because we understand why they want to be in that legacy bottle or whatever. We want to focus on those that are that they give you the highest return on the investment. And we see benefits in terms of not only reducing emissions, but as Ed said, the cube utilization in your truck when you're taking these lighter weight glass is way higher, and that's another savings.
Yep.
When your people are lifting these cases with the lightweight glass, there is less musculoskeletal injuries. In fact, we were able to measure that, and we were able to reduce our lost time injuries by 82% in our distribution centers, as well as in our retail back rooms. So there are huge benefits. And the consumers, we were concerned about the consumer in terms of, will they see these as a lower quality product? And you know what? They've gotten over it. We've educated the consumer, and it's totally seamless at this point. So I think there's a huge benefit in going to a lightweight glass, not only in terms of the reduction of emissions, but the other factors that I mentioned.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good point. And George, you've touched on this as others have before, but the point is as well that sustainability is not simply an environmental factor or relating to sort of climate change and carbon emissions. There's also the social and the economic sustainability that can come with it and is part of the broader picture. We've got I'm aware of time running actually, and our session is got not so long left if we stick within the hour. So I've got a couple of questions. We have many questions. Thank you, audience. I'm afraid I'm just not going to be able to get around to everyone. I think this is an interesting one, though, from, and forgive me, I might mispronounce your name, Mark Sukija, who's asking, some research has shown 90% of variance in consumer wine selection being influenced by bottling and labeling. How effectively can producers communicate their sustainable credentials with fairly limited visual real estate? Could that communication be a product difference on the shelf? So I think what we're getting at here is, and this may come back to New Zealand, then perhaps ask one or two of the retailers. Could more be done through the packaging, whether that's bottle or whether that's cans or bag-in-box pouch, whatever, to drive home that sort of sustainability message, Ed?
That's a $64,000 question. If ever there was one.
Another webinar and a half, isn't it?
Yeah. So there's the question is accurate. It's really challenging to communicate those credentials quickly and effectively on the label. We've got the Swins logo, but that sits on the back label of bottles, which highlights that everything through from viticulture through to the winemaking processes has been sustainably accredited. But explaining that is really challenging. And I think when you look at bottles, there's badges and labels, or badges and adornments on labels everywhere, and it's just another one that's competing for space. And so I throw it open to perhaps some other panelists around their views on how we can communicate on the bottle sustainability credentials.
Yeah, because this is absolutely key, because you can have amazing programs. You can have 98%, if that was the figure you threw out, Ed, of producers on board, all going in the right direction. You can have this happening in different markets around the world, but if all this activity isn't clearly communicated and there's a profusion and confusion of labels out there, it's not telling.
I think it's got to be done as a package. It's not just the label. It's the education and the marketing that goes with the label and the commitment of your producers to meet those standards and criteria.
I think, Andrew, that retailers, just such as the LCBO, for example, we also have a role to play in terms of setting standards and championing those that are doing great work on these issues in our stores, but also educating our people and our consumers. But one of the challenges that I mentioned before is that there isn't a single sustainability definition or a guideline. And it's been very difficult to communicate what the logo on the label means, because it's different for every single region. If we can come to some kind of an agreement of at least at a high level what sustainability means, it would be much easier for us to educate our consumers. We're doing the same with obviously with our employees, because it's important. It starts from within. But in the case of organic or biodynamic, there are specific standards, and it's easier to interpret, and it's easier to communicate those standards. Whereas in sustainability, it's a much more complex
situation. Simon, you were nodding there.
I would agree wholeheartedly with George on that. That's been a really challenging thing for us to communicate to buyers, both restaurant and retail buyers here in the US, that sustainability does matter. I think a lot of them perhaps just look at things just from a biodynamic or organic perspective and think that's where it sort of ends. I'd have to say just the SWIN site itself has some fantastic information on it, and I would say to anybody who's importing New Zealand wine or selling New Zealand wine to maybe look at the guidelines that they have on there, because it makes the job that much easier, sort of getting that point across to that buyer, because the buyer is obviously the one who's going to be selling that on to the consumer. They're the one who are going to probably define a lot of what the information the consumer does get. So I would definitely go on the SWIN site just to look up some of that information. It's really, really great.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you. I'd just like to, I think I agree with all of those points. I think the challenge from the on-shelf perspective is, as Troy says, there's a myriad of different certifications, and equally customers look at very little when they're shopping. And equally, the shopper is not necessarily the person who's going to consume it, so they don't necessarily buy with their own mindset either. They might just be looking at a list where they buy what they always buy. However, this is potentially a really great opportunity that's going to come out of COVID, which is that mass change to online shopping, where there's probably more that all of us can do online to make that simple. I mean, you've probably all seen Amazon have got their climate friendly badge, whatever it is, where they've come up with a third party certification. It's a third party audited certification that check all those products, so that it's not Amazon itself. And you'll notice, ironically, there's very little wine or alcohol, because the certification and the standards still don't quite match up. So it's still not really possible to do that auditing. But that's where I think our potential is in the next 12 to 18 months.
Yeah, if I could follow up on the back of that, I think the wine industry itself has created a bit of our own challenge. The American Association of Wine Economists did a study, and they basically took really nice wine and put it in cheap bottles. Sorry, there's no Germans on, but Blue Nun and Black Tower and these kinds of things. And similarly took inexpensive wine, put them in very nice, thick wine bottles. And across the board, everybody up to the experts was influenced more on packaging than they were on the product inside of it. So that is just consumer behavior. When I was in the spirits trade in the States, I could change my supplier of the bulk liquid and I would never get a complaint. The second I changed the label, I'd get tons of complaints on how the product changed. I'm sure Ann sees that constantly. And so the general consumer behavior, and so we're trying to translate everything that we've trained them about what premium is, what good is, and all of these things. And now we're trying to explain to everyone, sustainability, miles organic, etc. And when you look at Google Trends, one of the highest Google Trends is natural wine, right? It's just gotten this traction out there that's great, because who wants to drink unnatural wine? But what is natural wine? They're not looking for organic, they're looking for natural wine, more than organic, more than biodynamic. And so I do think this is where the fragmentation of the trade and the fragmentation of the trade in country creates a bit of confusion. So George, and I think Sweden has done a great job as well. Sweden has literally taken every country, identified every program that they have, communicated on their website in stores on what each of these sustainability programs are. Sweden actually goes and audits some of it, and then we'll share that with some other folks. I bet George does some similar activity. So I think this is where a bit of the monopoly has a bit of the advantage to be able to translate and communicate to the people through the stores and websites because of its strength of channel distribution. But I think with Ann, and it's really difficult for us And I think this is where the trade, I think, like everyone said, it's moving in the right direction, but we've created some difficult challenges for us because of the fragmentation and historic practices. And so we'd really be well suited either by country or by other kinds of means to align a little bit on, what these kinds of terms and messages could mean. But at the same time, I think New Zealand's doing a great job. They don't necessarily want to align, I think commercially with a lot of other people, because it's a bit of a point of difference for them as a country, which creates a bit of the difficulty as well and the fragmentation within the trade and outside of the trade. So I think it's moving in the right direction, but we're also coming at a point that if we don't get a bit of alignment, we could go backwards. And I think it'd be good if we, in the trade helped facilitate these conversations and get a little bit more communication and alignment to make it much simpler for the consumer.
Absolutely.
Because once we do that, then I think you get the best behavior through the entire value chain.
Yeah, and I'm going to bring you in, Anne, as you're doing a thumbs up as well. But also, Jonathan Roble out there just has made a comment / question, which I think relates to this with, and he's saying, with disparate challenges worldwide on sustainability, particularly in regard to climate, will all producers be deemed to be sustainable, or will there be a sorting out of the relative order? And I thought there was a nice little sort of provocative sting in the end there. But if you wanted to answer Troy's question, but I thought that was just perhaps a sort of relevant background as to whether or not some will emerge as some regions, some producing regions or whole countries will emerge stronger and more recognizable as having moved further down this route, and it'll be simpler for consumers to understand. And because, I mean, to be fair, New Zealand is not to do their own marketing work for them, but it's already understood to be a sort of clean and green land. So you've got a real head start there, Ed, I think, in terms of people's perception, moving there to move away from, a polluted, noisy world to get some peace in your beautiful country. So, but Anne, what thoughts in response to Troy and all of that?
Yeah, so I think there are 2 points there. I think firstly, I agree. I mean, it's got to be credible, or there's no point, or we're just stabbing ourselves in the foot. Whatever we do has got to be credible, and that unfortunately means that a line has to be drawn somewhere. You can't claim something sustainable if it blatantly isn't on one aspect or another, and that is going to be difficult. But actually, one of the points I wanted to pick up from Troy, but also one of the questions that I've seen come in, is about that fragmentation of the industry and global consensus. One of the other, I think, challenges we have as an industry, which we've put upon ourselves, is the belief that small is beautiful. And that if it comes, and yes, to the question, we do lovely lots of local wines from within 30 miles of each shop. But actually, just because it's small and local doesn't mean it's sustainable. They may be pumping out a very small amount of diesel compared to a massive winery, but actually that percentage of carbon emissions might be much bigger. And you make a much bigger change to the planet by looking at, for example, some of the changes that Gallo have made. That would have made a much bigger difference to the planet than someone buying something because it comes from 30 miles away, not 60 miles away. And New Zealand's a great example of that. There's some brilliant sustainability, but those vineyards are not small, necessarily. We're not talking about Burgundian size here. So I think we have to be very careful to look at the facts and not to look at the romance. And that is part of the challenge, because we all love the product because of the romance, the history, the sociology, everything that it does to bring us together as human beings. And we have to balance that with the science. And I'm not going to turn this into a COVID let's follow the science moment, but I think we have to be mindful of that as we take these discussions forward, where we want to protect the romance but also be guided by science.
And I'm very disappointed you don't now have a couple of scientists with about 400 graphs and charts that you
Next slide, please.
We'll do that another session. But no, it's a really valid point. I think many of us like to think that we're supporting local shops, our greengrocers, etc. And it's great and healthy to have that mix on the high street, but it's possibly better to have the efficiencies of central supermarket distribution to get the food around the nation.
Local and regional in somewhere where the wine comes from just next door is fine, but actually there's no assumption that a smaller I don't want to criticize anyone from any country, but a smaller winery from Spain might be more environmentally friendly than a larger winery from Spain. You just can't make that assumption.
Yeah, no, sure, exactly. Just picking up on a few more comments here. this is changing the tack very slightly, but I think we've covered quite a lot of ground on that. And I'm going to throw this back to you, Ed. Richard Bamfield, MW, based here in the UK, has asked a question about various shipping companies and whether some are particularly standout and whether there's any drive in the industry. This coming back to our core point about food miles, whether there are any you prefer over others. And I've been quite interested myself, actually, reading around shipping and the moves that shipping companies are making to reduce their carbon footprint, but obviously with the benefit of if they have fuel cost savings, the whole issue over diesel, et cetera, and things that are going on there within that industry. But are there any that you particularly tend to favour as an industry? Are some stand out, others not? What's going on there?
So I think there's a great example, not just in shipping, but it's in the entire logistics chain. So there's Marlborough is the key or largest wine producing region in New Zealand, and the closest major port is Nelson, which is around an hour and a half's drive away or a little bit longer to the port. And there's a company called Key Connect, which has really ensured that maximize the efficiencies in the transfer of wine produced in Marlborough and bottled in Marlborough to the Port of Nelson, and then making sure that the empty bottles that are then, the bottles that are then taken over are then shipped, and then pallets are coming back. And so, like, I think I don't have examples of actual shipping companies, but you've got to think broader than just shipping. You've got to think your whole supply chain, and the ability, like Key Connect has shown, to really maximize efficiency to minimize carbon emissions. And a great story between Wineworks, a bottling company, a trucking, and then an arrangement at the port. It's really getting that all aligned and ready to go to minimize those emissions.
Yeah, sure. Okay, thanks, Ed. Does anyone else want to pick up on that? Yeah, Troy.
Well, actually, I think there is. I think the pressure that's being brought to bear, and some of the big distribution companies, and going back to the States, the DHLs and all these big guys, they are actually investing in and commercializing, vegetable oil, using alternative sources of fuel. And, it's very difficult for small suppliers that are running, a couple of Sprinters or some, a few Arctics around to do it. But I think you are seeing, and again, this is more internally, the ability of some of these big companies that are coming up and pioneering certain technology. And hopefully once, they're gigantic fleets, and the big food companies in the US and big food distributors around the world, they're actually pioneering a couple of really great pieces of technology that I think once there is a commercialization and a mass production, brings the prices down that everybody can use it. So I think there is a lot of really good progress out there. There is, in the States where a lot of the freight is going, they're actually using a ghost truck that follows the main truck. So it's reducing one head, and they get actually a lot of draft behind it. So there's actually some fascinating things that are going on there. And I think, it's on the cusp of becoming more commercial, that everybody can be able to afford it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Troy. And George, a few more words on that, and then
we're very mindful of transportation as well. So obviously, the H2O highway is the most environmental, best environmentally, way that you can use. We try not to use as much trucking. We use a lot of rail, because we feel that next to a freight, next to a vessel is rail. We give you an example. We were bringing products from Mexico through trucks. Now we're bringing it through the Port of Montreal, so using the H2O highway. And we also have contractual agreements that we have with freight forwarders, like DHL, for example. There's always a statement in there on the reduction of emissions. One of the things that we do here in Canada, especially during the winter, is we have what we call gensets, or heaters, in the containers. What we do is we try to shut down those heaters as much as possible. And in some cases, we were able to save 300,000 or 400,000 gallons of diesel a year. So we measure all of that. And by being able to measure, we're able to go back to the partners that we have and push them to do better the next contract or the next.
Andrew, I had a chat with our logistics partner throughout the week on some of these topics, and he had mentioned as of Jan 1, most of the shipping lines that they're working with are part of a global initiative to cut sulfur oxide levels with diesel fuel from 3.5% down to 0.5%. So that's a 77% reduction right there. And he also mentioned that they have some clients that are looking to use biofuel trucks and electric trucks. So there has been, I guess, a wee bit of a move on that front. And I don't know, maybe it's perhaps as a goal for a lot of us to sort of get behind eventually.
We say it's further steps down. You know, several of you on the panel, all of you, I think, have intimated a sort of journey, and it's a journey towards greater sustainability taking place sometimes on many parallel paths. And it's a question of, you know, once you've perhaps picked the low-hanging fruit and done what you can, and that might be easier to do in the vineyard, it might be easier to do in the winery, it might be easier to do with your power sources, sustainable power. It's progressing down that route. And I think, I mean, someone makes the comment in the chat, actually. I was sort of keeping a loose eye, and I know Annie responded to some of the comments in there. Just saying it's, and forgive me that I should say who it is, Paul Howard, saying, I believe it's important the sustainability message should be communicated far better by all wine industry actors, especially the comms media. Perhaps it's part of the product proposition, or should be. Yes, it's hard to explain, but repeat as part of the package. And I think it's sort of progress where one can as one of the actors within that, and then it's up to all of us, actually, isn't it, to continue to sort of promote the positive messages and to help direct people. And I'm aware of time. We've got too many questions, I think, to cover, but hopefully, audience out there, we have covered a lot of what you've been asking about, and I think possibly we have. I don't know, in terms of beginning to sum up, whether any on the panel have any more to add, and especially coming back to maybe that core point or key point about the whole food miles issue. I'm not sure if we've solved it, but I think we've hopefully encouraged sort of further conversation and come up, I think, some really interesting points, actually, as to what the real issues are and how we continue to communicate on these subjects. Troy, you're smiling. Is it time for me to shut up, or are you?
No. Someone had commented on my perfectly placed Yeelands bottle in the chat. So marketing job well done. But I think on the summary, and again, using Yeelands as an example, they were net zero from inception, and they do so many things. They got 1,300 solar panels, so it's like 15% of their power they're doing. They have a bunch of their own. They offset 82 tons of because of the power. They've got sheep that they've got secondary cover crops, purpose-built compost facility. There's all these great things, and I think the challenge is, like we said, how do you? That's easy on a tender to convince someone in a retail environment or somewhere else that you are actually really engaged with brands that take this seriously. But I think getting that communication to the consumer is the challenge that we have. They want it. They want something good. They want something positive, and they want to be seen as helping. But again, I think part of our industry has the challenge of how to communicate this easily and seamlessly to the consumer. And to Ann's point, what we don't want to do is reward bad behavior in the trade that's trying to position itself as the right thing to do. So I guess if that's the worst thing that we can do is take all the good stuff that we're doing and find a way to better market it, at least that's a lot of progress from where we were 5 years ago.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, and I think,
George,
Andrew,
Sorry, George.
Sorry, I was just going to say that I think what would definitely help is to create some KPIs for all of us. And I do think producers and importers and retailers really need to work together to provide a fulsome picture for the customer. And someone said, repeat the same message over and over and over. That's exactly what you really need to do, is you need to find all types of channels that you can send that message to the consumers. And we have so many channels today, whether it is social, in our case, the lcbo.com, in stores, with aligning to the LCBO brand and so on and so forth. So we have so many channels that we can send a message. We just have to make sure that we work together.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ed, do you want to wrap up with a final word?
Yeah, sure. So when you're looking to make your wine purchase decision, please think broadly in terms of what sustainability actually means. And we're making that choice. You can rest assured that in New Zealand we're committed to protecting the people and the places that make our world-renowned wine. We've got 25 years of evidence regarding what we do and how we do it. And please get in contact with me if you'd like to know more.
Excellent, thank you very much. I think on that note, I'll draw it to a close. I know we could run and run. There's so much to be said, so much to be explored on this topic. But as I say, hopefully we've prompted further conversation and sort of moved it along the road a little bit. So I'd very, very much like to thank excellent panels, Simon, Anne, George, Troy, and yourself, Ed. I'd like to thank New Zealand wine growers for partnering with Harpers to make this happen. Wish you well with the rest of your New Zealand Wine Week. And as I said at the beginning, you can check out on the New Zealand Wine website. There are a lot of really, really good and tasty looking and interesting looking webinars and sessions going on there. And last but very far from least, you, the audience, for joining us, for taking the time out and for so many comments and questions. We've sparked some debate among you as well, which is great, and good to see you all out there. And hopefully you found it a worthwhile session. So from me too, thank you very much. Good to see you all, and hope to see you soon, perhaps in the flesh in the not too distant future.